She moved quickly between the tables, carrying plates and glasses with steady hands. The restaurant was small, warm, and always filled with the sound of people talking, forks clicking, and chairs scraping. Most customers hardly noticed her. She was just the quiet waitress who never talked more than she needed to. But she didn't mind. Or at least she told herself that every morning she arrived before the place opened. She helped arrange the tables, wiped down menus, and made sure the counter looked clean. Her routine was the same every day, and she had grown used to it. Some customers were kind, some were in a hurry, and some complained about little things. She learned to smile through everything, but there was one thing in that place that always pulled her. Attention, the old piano in the corner. It sat there like a forgotten piece of someone's dream. Its dark wooden surface was scratched, and the keys were a mix of bright white and faded yellow. Many people thought it was just decoration. The manager said it had been there longer than any of the current staff. She always looked at it as she passed by, wishing she could play even one song. Her fingers would twitch a little, like they were remembering something. Sometimes when the restaurant was empty for a moment, she would pretend she was pressing invisible keys in the air while she leaned against the counter. She had loved music since she was small. Back then, she didn't have a piano of her own, but she had a way of learning by listening. If she heard a song even once, she could repeat the melody on anything that made a sound like the edge of a table or a set of cups. Her family didn't have the money for lessons, but music felt like something that belonged to her anyway. Still, life had a way of pulling her away from her dreams. When she grew older, she needed to work. She took any job she could find, and eventually, she settled into this restaurant because at least it helped her pay the bills. And the piano stayed where it was, waiting, untouched. One calm afternoon, when the lunch rush had passed and only a few customers remained, she found herself humming a tune while cleaning a table. It wasn't something she planned. It just slipped out of her. The soft melody floated through the room. No one paid much attention, but the sound made her heart feel lighter. Humming was the closest she allowed herself to come to her old dream. The other staff sometimes teased her gently, saying she must really like music. She only smiled and shrugged. She didn't want anyone to know how much she cared. The dream felt too big, too impossible. It was easier to keep it quiet. One day, as she wiped the piano's dusty top out of habit, her manager walked past and said, "You know, no one has played that thing in years." He laughed a little, shaking his head. "Probably doesn't even work anymore." She smiled politely, but she didn't agree. Something inside her told her the piano still had life left in it. It wasn't broken, it was simply waiting. But she didn't dare sit down and try. What if it really didn't work? What if it made a terrible sound? Or worse, what if someone saw her trying and laughed? The thought made her step away from it again, returning to her job and letting the piano continue to gather dust. In the evenings, the restaurant grew louder. Families came in for dinner, students gathered around tables to talk, and the scent of fresh food filled the air. She moved through the noise gracefully, placing dishes on tables, checking on orders, and keeping everything running smoothly. No one knew she watched people play imaginary keys on the table while waiting for their food. No one knew she listened carefully to every song that played from the small speaker behind the counter. Sometimes, when she walked home after closing, she would pass a music shop. Through the glass window, she would see shiny new pianos lined up in rows. She stopped for a few seconds each time, imagining what it would feel like to sit at one of them. But then, she kept walking, because dreams couldn't pay the bills. Back at home, her room was simple. A small bed, a small window, and not much else. But on her bedside table, she kept a small notebook filled with musical notes she wrote down from memory. She didn't have an instrument to test them on, but she trusted her mind. She wrote every tune she heard in her imagination, hoping one day she might get a chance to bring them to life. Weeks passed like this, and nothing changed. She worked, she smiled for customers, she hummed quietly, and the piano waited untouched. Still, something inside her felt restless, like a part of her was trying to wake up. One afternoon, a group of customers came in who seemed louder than usual. They looked like a music club, or maybe a small band. They talked excitedly about instruments, songs they were working on, and concerts they wanted to attend. She listened while taking their orders, trying not to seem too interested. As soon as they noticed the old piano in the corner, they started joking about it. "Look at that thing. Do you think it even works?" One of them laughed. "Probably not. It's just for show," another said, waving a hand at it. A few of them glanced toward her. "Hey, do you guys ever use it?" She shook her head politely. "Nobody really plays it. You know how to play anything?" One of them asked, half joking. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. She shook her head again. "I just listened to music." I didn't think much of her answer. They went back to their conversation, laughing about something else. But inside, she felt a strange mix of embarrassment and longing. She wanted to play. She wanted to walk up to that piano and show that it wasn't just decoration. But she didn't. She returned to wiping tables, keeping her eyes down. Every time she passed the piano, her heart beat a little faster. She imagined what it would feel like if she sat down just once. But fear kept her from moving closer. Later that night, when the restaurant was almost empty and only 2 tables remained, she paused near the piano again. She touched the edge of it softly, feeling the wood beneath her fingers. She wondered how the keys would feel. Would they still be smooth? Would they be stiff or loose? Would they make a sound? The manager saw her standing there for a moment and smiled lightly. "You always look at that piano like you're waiting for it to say something." She laughed, embarrassed. "I just like it. It looks nice. If you want to try it sometime, go ahead," he said casually. Just not during rush hour. His tone was light, but his words stuck with her. It was the first time someone had ever given her permission. Not that she needed it, but hearing it made something inside her shift. That night, after she clocked out, she lingered a little longer than usual. Most of the staff had already left. The restaurant was quiet now, with only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. The chairs were neatly arranged, the lights were dim, and the piano sat alone in the corner. She walked toward it slowly, acting like she was approaching something sacred. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. She placed her hand on the top again and let her fingers slide down until they touched the keys. They were cool, smooth, and familiar. So familiar that her breath caught in her throat. She pressed one key softly. A quiet note filled the empty room. It was a little out of tune, but it made her smile. The sound felt like a piece of her past calling out to her. She pressed another key, and another. The notes blended into a tiny, shaky melody. For a few seconds, she forgot about work, bills, customers, and everything else. It was just her and the music. But then she heard a noise behind her. A chair shifting, and she quickly pulled her hands away. One of the late-night cleaners walked out from the back room. She pretended she was just checking the piano for dust. "Long day?" the cleaner asked. She nodded quickly. "Yeah, just making sure everything looks right." She stepped away from the piano and picked up her bag. Her heart still beating fast from the moment of music she had allowed herself as she walked home that night. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A soft, tiny spark that made her steps feel lighter. She didn't know it yet, but the next days would bring a moment that would change everything. The day she would no longer just look at the piano, but finally sit down and play in front of a room full of people who never expected anything from her. For now, she just carried the memory of those few notes in her mind, letting them echo softly all the way home. The next morning started like any other day, but she felt different inside. She walked into the restaurant with a strange sense of nervous energy, as if something was about to happen. She didn't know what, but the feeling clung to her. She tied her apron, fixed her hair, and began setting up the tables. The quiet of the early morning gave her a moment to breathe. When she finished putting out the menus, she let her eyes drift toward the piano again. It sat there in the soft morning light, looking less like decoration, and more like a secret waiting to be discovered. She remembered the sound of the keys from the night before. Even though she only played a few notes, those sounds still echoed in her mind. It made her heart feel full in a way she had missed for years. Thinking about something. One of the cooks asked as he passed by with a box of vegetables. She quickly shook her head, smiling softly. "Just waking up, I guess." But it wasn't the truth. She was thinking, and she couldn't stop thinking. Her mind replayed the tiny melodies she played, and she couldn't help wondering what would happen if she played a real song. a full one, not just a few keys. Still, she pushed the thought away. The restaurant wasn't a place for her music. People came here to eat, talk, and go on with their lives. No one wanted a waitress with dreams bigger than her job, but the day didn't go the way she expected. By noon, the restaurant was full. People packed into every table, and the noise rose loud enough that she couldn't hear her own thoughts. She carried heavy trays, delivered plates, and tried to keep up with the endless requests. Busy days like this were normal, but something felt off. She felt uneasy, like she was waiting for something. Then Vay was delivering drinks to a family near the back. She noticed movement near the piano. A group of young people had arrived at the same group who had been there the other day. They recognized each other instantly. The one who joked about the piano earlier pointed toward it again. "There's that old thing," he said, laughing. "Still here," another person said. "I wonder if anyone's ever going to play it." She tried not to react. She set down the family's drinks and turned to walk away, hoping the group wouldn't say anything to her, but they did. "Hey," one of them called out, waving her over. She paused, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, we were just talking about the piano," the guy said. "You sure no one ever plays it?" She shook her head. "It's mostly just decoration." "Come on," he said with a grin. "You must know how to play at least something. You always look at it like you're thinking about trying." Her heart jumped. She didn't know he had noticed that. "I don't really play," she said quickly, even though it wasn't true. They didn't believe her. She could tell by the way they exchanged glances. "Try one note," another person said. "Just one. Let's see if it even works." "Can't. I'm working," she answered. Hoping the excuse would be enough, they let it go for the moment. But she could still feel their eyes following her as she moved around the room. Hours passed, and the lunch crowd slowly faded into the afternoon quiet. She finally got a moment to breathe. She leaned against the counter, rubbing her hands together. Her fingers felt restless again. They wanted to touch the keys. She didn't know why she felt so nervous. The group wasn't doing anything wrong. They were just curious. But their curiosity scared her, because deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted to try. She wanted to play. She wanted anyone to hear her just once. But she was afraid. Not afraid of the piano. Afraid of people? What if they laughed? What if she made a mistake? What if the piano didn't sound right and people assumed she didn't know what she was doing? The fear felt heavy in her chest. Still, something stronger than fear slowly began to form inside her. A small voice whispered that maybe this was her moment. Maybe she couldn't hide forever. The group stayed longer than most customers. They ordered drinks, talked, and laughed loudly. And every once in a while, one of them glanced at the piano like they were waiting for something to happen. Finally, one of them called her over again. "Please," he said with a kind smile this time. "We're just curious. If you don't want to play, that's fine. But if you do, we would love to hear it." His tone wasn't teasing anymore. It was genuine. She hesitated. "I don't know." Before she could finish, her manager walked by. He heard the last part of the conversation and stopped. "What's going on?" he asked. The group explained they just wanted to know if the piano worked and if she could try it. The manager laughed softly. "I told her she can play at any time if she wants, but only if she's comfortable." Her breath caught. She felt trapped between fear and longing. The manager smiled at her gently. "You can try a little if you want. The place is quiet now. No harm in it." She looked around. The room wasn't full anymore. A few customers were still eating, but most were caught up in their own conversations. She looked at the group. They smiled encouragingly. She looked at the piano, and then something shifted inside her. She didn't walk toward the piano at first. She walked toward the sink. She washed her hands, drying them slowly. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. There was excitement too. Something old inside her was waking up. She took a deep breath. Then she walked toward the piano. The restaurant grew, quieter as people noticed her moving with intention. Forks paused. Conversations softened. The group watched her with wide eyes. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. Her heart raced so fast she thought everyone could hear it. She slid her fingers lightly over the top. Feeling the dust under her skin, she pulled the chair out gently and sat. Her hands hovered above the keys. A few people turned their heads, curious. She felt their eyes. She felt the weight of their expectations, their doubt, their curiosity, their surprise. Her breath shook. She closed her eyes for a moment, then she pressed the first key. A single note rang out through the quiet room. The sound wasn't perfect. It was slightly out of tune, but it was enough to bring back a flood of memories, the small rooms where she learned to play, the soft nights she spent dreaming about music, the feeling of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Her hands moved again, pressing more keys. The shaky notes formed the beginning of a simple melody. The group leaned forward. A couple at a nearby table stopped talking. Even the manager stood still. She started slowly. Her fingers felt stiff after years of not playing. But within moments they remembered. Every note became easier. Every movement felt more natural. The shaky melody softened into something clear and gentle. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The music carried her. It wrapped around her like a warm blanket. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. The restaurant grew silent. People looked at her with disbelief. They were expecting random notes or a childish tune. They weren't expecting someone who played like she was born for it. Her fingers moved faster, growing bolder. The melody rose and fell beautifully. It filled every corner of the room. The group stared in awe. A little child at a table whispered, "She's really good." She didn't hear it. She was lost in the music. Every emotion she had kept inside for years slipped into the notes. Her hope, her stress, her dreams, her exhaustion, everything poured out through her fingertips. A few customers took out their phones, recording the moment. They didn't want to miss it. They didn't want the world to miss it. The manager covered his mouth, stunned. He had never seen her like this. Her hands moved faster now, dancing across the keys. The melody became full and powerful. The room felt different, lighter, warmer, more alive. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played because she couldn't hold it in anymore. The piano was old, dusty, and imperfect, but it carried her music beautifully. When she finally finished, her fingers hovered in the air for a moment. Before falling gently into her lap, silence filled the room. Then the applause began. It wasn't soft. It wasn't polite. It was loud, louder than anything she had ever heard in that place. People clapped with genuine excitement. Some even stood up. The group cheered loudly. One of them said, "How were you hiding this?" She stared at them, breathless, unsure what to say. Her heart felt light and heavy at the same time. Her manager shook his head, smiling with disbelief. "All this time? And you never said a word." She looked down at her hands. They were still trembling, but now with joy. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what this moment meant, but she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope for the first time. She began to believe her dream wasn't lost. It was just waiting for the right moment, and that moment had finally come. For the rest of the day, her mind replayed the moment she sat at the piano. Every note she played came back to her like a soft echo. Even when she carried trays or wiped tables, she felt the music still moving through her hands. It didn't feel real. She had spent years hiding her talent, and now suddenly she had played in front of a room full of people. The applause still echoed inside her chest, but along with the excitement came fear. What if it was just a lucky moment? What if she could never play like that again? The thought troubled her as she finished her shift. When she walked home, she felt lighter on her feet, almost like she was floating. The night air was cool, and she could still feel the warmth of the piano keys on her fingers. She didn't want the feeling to fade. For once, she didn't rush home. She walked slowly, letting her thoughts wander. When she finally reached her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed. She opened her notebook, the one filled with music she had written over the years. She flipped through the pages slowly, seeing the notes she once wrote in quiet moments when she believed no one would ever hear them. Now she wondered if maybe someone could. She placed her hand on the first page and smiled softly. She didn't play those songs last night, but maybe one day she would. The next morning, she woke up with a heavy feeling in her stomach. She didn't know if it was nerves or excitement. Maybe it was both. The idea of walking back into the restaurant after yesterday's performance made her feel exposed. Like everyone would stare at her, but she couldn't avoid it. She needed the job. She couldn't hide from the moment she created. When she stepped into the restaurant, she immediately noticed something different. The staff looked at her with curiosity. The cook smiled a little wider than usual. The cleaner from last night gave her a small nod, almost like a quiet congratulations. And the manager. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and pride. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning," the manager replied, his smile still there. "You made the night interesting yesterday." She felt her cheeks turn warm. She didn't know what to say. "You were amazing," he said gently. "Didn't know you had that in you." She gave a small shrug. "I didn't think anyone wanted to know," he said. "Now they do." She didn't know what that meant, but she felt a small spark of hope in his words. A few minutes later, the group from yesterday walked in again. They weren't as loud this time. They walked in with a sense of excitement, as if they returned with purpose. When they saw her, they smiled. "There she is," one of them said. She froze for a second, but forced herself to greet them. "Good morning," gathered around the table near the piano again. She wondered if they planned it that way. "Are you going to play again today?" one of them asked. She shook her head quickly. "I'm working. And yesterday was just—" She paused. Just a moment. They shared a look, as if silently agreeing she was being humble. "Yesterday wasn't just a moment," one of them said. "That was real talent." She felt her heart squeeze. Compliments weren't something she was used to. Before she could respond, more customers walked in, and she hurried away to take their orders. But all morning she felt the pressure of eyes watching her, not in a bad way, but in a curious, hopeful way. The piano sat there quietly, almost calling her by afternoon. The restaurant grew busy again. People filled every chair, and the air buzzed with chatter. She moved from table to table. But today she noticed something she never saw before. People were whispering about her. "That's the girl from last night. She really played the piano. I saw the video someone posted." Her heart raced. Someone posted a video. She wondered how many people saw it. She tried to stay focused on her work. But the more she tried to act normal, the more the day felt unusual. Every time she walked past the piano, she felt people glance at it, and then at her. Then in the late afternoon, something unexpected happened. A small family walked into the restaurant, a mother, father, and a young girl who looked about 8 or 9. The girl stared at the piano with wide eyes. The family took a seat near the window, and the little girl whispered something to her mother. The mother smiled politely and waved the waitress over. "Excuse me," she said softly. "My daughter saw the video of you playing yesterday." The waitress froze. "She did?" The little girl nodded shyly. "She wanted to know if you might play a little again," the mother said kindly. "Only if you want to. No pressure." The waitress felt her heart tighten. The request was gentle, not demanding. The girl looked at her with so much hope, but she shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry. I can't right now. It's busy." The girl nodded, understanding, but she looked a little disappointed. The waitress walked away with a heavy heart. She wanted to play. She wanted to make the girl smile, but she didn't know if she could open herself again. Yesterday felt like a dream. Today felt like waking up. Hours passed, and the crowd slowly thinned. The little girl's family finished their meal and prepared to leave. As they passed the piano, the girl reached out and touched one of the keys. Gently, it made a soft sound. The waitress stood behind the counter. Watching, the girl looked back at her with a small smile, one that asked for nothing now, just gratitude. Her chest tightened again. She walked over slowly. "Wait," she said gently. The family turned around. "I can play something," she said softly. "If you still want." The little girl's face lit up like sunshine. The restaurant wasn't empty, but it wasn't too full either. A few customers looked up with interest. The staff paused what they were doing, watching quietly. The The waitress sat down at the piano again. Her hands trembled, but not from fear this time. From emotion, she played something softer today, something gentle and warm. The notes floated through the room like a warm breeze. The little girl listened with wide, bright eyes. Her parents smiled softly. A few customers closed their eyes, enjoying the music. This time she didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't try to play perfectly. She just played from her heart. The melody was slow and comforting, like a lullaby mixed with hope. The room grew quiet again. Every person felt the softness in the air. When she finished, the girl clapped with excitement. The family thanked her again and again. As the girl left, she turned back one more time and said, "I want to play like you someday." The waitress felt her eyes sting. She smiled and nodded. "You will. Just don't stop." When they left, she stared at the piano for a long moment. She didn't notice the customers behind her, the ones who recorded the moment again. She didn't see the manager wiping his eyes quietly. She didn't see the group from the other day smiling proudly. She only felt warmth inside her chest. That evening, she finished her shift and stepped outside. She checked her phone. She didn't expect anything unusual, but she saw dozens of notifications, messages. She didn't recognize comments. From strangers, a new video, the video from the girl's family had already been posted, and it was spreading fast. At first, she panicked. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to become a topic online, but as she read the comments, her fear softened. People wrote things like, "She plays with so much heart, such a beautiful moment, pure talent. She deserves a chance." She sat on a bench outside the restaurant, reading every word. Each comment filled her with something she hadn't felt in years. Belief. Not just other people, it's believing in her, but her beginning to believe in herself. She closed her phone and looked up at the night sky. For the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine something bigger, something brighter. Maybe this wasn't just a moment. Maybe this was the beginning of something. Inside the restaurant, the piano waited, and she knew she wasn't done with it yet. The next days passed slowly for her. Even though the restaurant was full of noise and movement, she tried to stay busy with the usual work like carrying plates and wiping tables. But her mind kept returning to the night she played. She could still feel how her hands shook at the start, how the room had gone silent, how the people stared at her like she did not belong near a piano. And she remembered the moment the melody changed their eyes. That moment stayed with her, almost glowing in her memory. But even with the good memory, doubt found its way back in. She kept asking herself if the crowd only clapped to be polite, or if they would have reacted differently in another place. Maybe they only clapped because they were surprised, not because she was truly good. These thoughts made her quieter than usual. Even when she tried hard to hide it, her coworkers noticed something felt different. One afternoon, while she cleaned the counter, one of them said softly, "You look tired today. Everything okay?" She simply nodded and smiled, not wanting to talk about the heavy feeling inside her. She felt shy sharing her dreams or fears, because she was used to people not understanding why music mattered so much. Still, there was one thing she could not ignore. People in the restaurant had started whispering when they saw her. They were the same customers who sat at the tables every week, and almost all of them had been there the night she played. Now, whenever she walked by, she heard small pieces of sentences like, "That's her?" or "She's the girl who played last time." Some of the whispers were warm, but others sounded doubtful. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone asked her to play again. She was not sure if she wanted them to. Part of her wanted to run back to the piano and play her heart out, but another part wanted to hide from the pressure that came with it. The pressure grew bigger when the restaurant manager approached her one evening. He looked at her with a serious face, but not an unkind one. He told her that people had been asking if she would play again. He said the restaurant was getting attention because of her performance, and some customers were even planning their visit in hopes of hearing her again. He then asked her if she wanted to play on the weekend. The moment he asked, she felt a rush of fear and excitement. Her throat tightened, and her hands felt cold. She did not answer right away. She looked at the floor, the wall, the tables anywhere but his eyes. She was scared of disappointing people a second time. The first time she played, she had no idea she was being watched. This time, everyone would be waiting, expecting, hoping. And expectations felt heavier than any tray she had ever carried, but the manager waited patiently. He said she didn't have to answer right away, but he would need her decision by the next afternoon. She went home that night feeling torn. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the small keyboard she had saved up for. It was old and missing a few keys, but she loved it deeply. She ran her fingers across the plastic surface, imagining the warmth of real wooden piano keys. She closed her eyes and let her hands move gently, not making any sound, but feeling the music inside her. She knew she couldn't ignore the opportunity in front of her. She also knew she couldn't let fear decide her path. So the next day, after hours of thinking, she walked up to the manager and told him quietly, "I'll do it," he smiled, and told her he believed in her, and for a second, she allowed herself to believe him. The weekend came faster than she expected. The restaurant felt different as soon as she walked in that evening. The lights seemed softer, the air heavier with expectation. Some customers were dressed nicer than usual, as if they were attending something special. She felt her chest grow tight again, and she had to remind herself to breathe slowly. When the time finally came, the manager gave her a small nod. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and walked towards the piano. The crowd stopped talking when she sat down. She could feel their eyes on her skin like warm pressure. The room was too quiet. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, and for a moment, she froze. A wave of fear washed over her. She felt like she might forget how to play. She felt like her hands might shake too much. She felt like she did not deserve to be there. But then she remembered the night she played before anyone was watching. She remembered the feeling of losing herself in the music. She remembered how the melody had felt like home, and so she took another breath. Her fingers pressed the first notes. The sound was soft, almost shy, but it carried across the room. She kept her eyes on the keys, letting them guide her. Slowly, the music started to flow, like water finding its path. She could feel the crowd listening closely. No one whispered. No one clinked their fork. The melody grew stronger, deeper. Her shoulders relaxed, and the fear began to melt away. She was no longer thinking about who was watching. She was only thinking about the story in the music, the emotions she had carried inside her for years. Her fingers danced across the keys like they had been waiting for this moment. Halfway through, she felt something shift in the room. She could sense that the crowd was not just listening, they were feeling something. She didn't dare look up, but she felt it like a warmth spreading around her. Then, as she reached the final notes, she let them linger in the air for a long moment. Her hands rested on her lap as the music faded. The restaurant stayed silent. For a second, she thought she had failed, but then the first clap started, and then another. And soon the whole room erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering, clapping, smiling. She looked up finally and saw faces full of awe, surprise, and admiration. A few even looked emotional. She felt her chest swell with relief and happiness so strong it almost made her tear up. She smiled softly, shy but grateful. That night, she did not just prove she could play, she proved she belonged. She proved the doubt wrong, and she proved to herself that some moments require courage, even if the courage shakes when you hold it. What she did not know was that this night would change everything for her, more than she could imagine. And the next part of her story was only beginning. When she woke up the next morning, the first thing she noticed was how calm the world felt. The sunlight came softly through the thin curtain, warming the small room she had called home for years. Usually, she woke up thinking about the long day at the restaurant, about the customers who barely remembered her face, about the dreams she kept hidden deep inside. But this morning felt different. Her heart was still full from the night before. She caught herself smiling before she even opened her eyes fully. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, replaying the applause in her mind. She wondered if the people who had clapped still remembered her performance, or if it had been a moment that only felt big because she had lived it. But even if they forgot, she knew she wouldn't. Something inside her had shifted forever. When she arrived at the restaurant that afternoon, the first thing she noticed was how people looked at her. Not with doubt, not with confusion, not as if she were only carrying plates and nothing more. Instead, they looked at her with recognition, with kindness, with a sense of respect she wasn't used to. A regular customer waved at her and said, "You played beautifully last night." She thanked him softly, feeling shy but happy. Another customer asked if she would play again. Someone else told her they brought their family because they had heard about her performance. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Every word felt strange. Like wearing a new coat that still needed time to fit just right. The manager asked her to play again the next weekend. He said gently that she didn't have to say yes, but he hoped she would. She agreed, her voice small but sure. She wanted to grow. She wanted to see where this path might lead. Over the next few days, life felt both familiar and new. She still carried plates, cleaned tables, smiled at customers, and tried not to spill drinks when she hurried. But now, people noticed her. They asked her about the songs she played. They asked where she learned to play. She never had a real teacher, only old videos and a soft ear that could feel music deeply. She explained that she learned everything on her own. People looked amazed. Even though things were changing around her, she didn't want to act different. She stayed humble, gentle, and shy. She didn't want the attention to change who she was. On her breaks, she practiced quietly on her small keyboard at home. The keys were uneven, the sound wasn't smooth, yet she used it with love. She would play until her fingers felt warm, until her thoughts felt clear. The more she practiced, the more she realized how much she wanted music in her life. When the next weekend came, the restaurant felt even more crowded than before. People gathered early, as if they didn't want to miss a single moment. She felt nervous at first, but when she sat at the piano again and placed her fingers gently on the keys, she remembered the quiet promise she made to herself to play with honesty. Not perfection, her music filled the room once more. She played a melody she had never played for anyone else, a melody she created late at night, when the world was asleep and she felt the weight of her dreams pressing gently on her chest. The room grew quiet instantly. She didn't look up, but she could feel the air shift again, the same way it had before. This time, when she finished, the applause came like a wave. Some people stood, some whistled, some wiped tears. She never expected her music to touch people so deeply. It humbled her in a way she could barely understand. After the performance, something happened that would change everything. A woman approached her, dressed neatly, with a soft smile and warm eyes. She introduced herself as someone who worked with local musicians, helping them find opportunities to grow. She said she had heard about the waitress who played the piano so beautifully, and she wanted to see for herself. After hearing her play, she wanted to help. The words felt unreal to her. She wasn't sure if she should believe them. But the woman assured her that talent like hers shouldn't stay hidden behind trays and busy tables. She said she could help her find small events, open mic nights, community shows, places where people came to listen to new musicians. The idea scared her at first. New places, new faces, stages she had never stood on. It was all so much. But she also felt something else inside her. Hope. A hope she had quietly carried since childhood. She thanked the woman and promised she would think about it. That night, when she returned home, she sat with her keyboard again. She placed her hands on the keys and let her fingers move slowly. She thought about her life, the years of working long hours, the nights spent dreaming, the feeling of almost giving up on herself, the moment she first played in front of a crowd, and the way people looked at her now. She realized that playing the piano wasn't just a talent. It was her voice, her escape, her truth. When she played, she felt free. She felt seen. She stayed awake for hours, thinking, playing, feeling by morning. She knew her answer. The next day, she found the woman in the restaurant and told her she was ready to take the chance. The woman smiled warmly and said she would help her step by step. She didn't promise fame or big crowds. She promised guidance, opportunities, and support. That was all she needed. Weeks passed. She found herself playing in small community centers, tiny cafes, and local gatherings. The crowds were small, but they listened closely. They appreciated her music, her softness, her sincerity. People would approach her afterward and tell her how her melodies made them feel calm, hopeful, or emotional. Every word added a little more confidence to her heart. She began to feel something she had never felt before: belonging. The restaurant continued to support her. They still asked her to play sometimes, and she always said yes. It was the place where her journey began, and she never wanted to forget that. One night, after a small performance at a neighborhood cafe, she walked home under the dim streetlights with a warm cup of tea in her hands. She felt tired, but in a good way, a way that comes from doing something that matters. She thought about how far she had come. She thought about how scared she used to be of being seen. She thought about how the crowd once doubted her, how she once doubted herself. Now she understood something important. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in quiet dreams, waiting for the right moment. And sometimes it sits at a piano in a restaurant. Rising gently from a girl who spent years thinking she wasn't enough, she reached her door, unlocked it, and stepped inside her little room. She placed her tea on the table and sat in front of her keyboard again. She smiled softly as she touched the worn-out keys. She knew her journey was only beginning. There would be challenges, long days, and moments of fear again, but now she knew she could face them. She had found her place in the world, and she had found it through the music inside her. She closed her eyes and played a new melody, one full of hope, courage, and a future waiting for her. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just dream of becoming a musician, she believed it.